What's that? Who there? Whoa.
This is the brainstorm. So it's I've kind of got a part one, part two here for you. So the first one is more higher level, and it's just around like emerging trends. So what are some emerging trends or other spaces at a higher level, industry wide, that interest you? Either put your investor hat on or builder hat that you would consider pursuing, and then we'll kind of double click into some ideas after that.
Yeah, so I think that at the e-commerce space, I do think platforms are really important. I think that, but beyond that, I think with the pandemic and what's been going on, I think the new age of working from home and the pseudo model that you're going to see of like the satellite office type of situations, and whether it is at the real estate level and like kind of a rebirth of some of these like WeWorks of the world, or it is products that help facilitate better work, that is going to be really, really, really important. And there's already a lot of those products that are positioned to do well, but I guarantee you that there will be other products that in this pseudo environment are going to come out that are going to be pretty amazing on the work side. So I think that's something to just take a look at. And I don't really know that space very well, but it's just clear that that's a macro trend. Most people through the pandemic have been like, yeah, I do enjoy working from home to like a certain extent. And people that are a little bit older who are more in positions of power, like, wow, my workforce actually gets stuff done when they're at home. We're not just like watching TV, we're doing stuff. And I think that solving those needs is going to be really important. And then I think that from a healthcare perspective, you're going to also see that acceleration where there's going to be more and more virtual orientation on the health side, because for forever, people were locked down. They couldn't go to the dentist. They couldn't, get their eyes checked. They couldn't see these different things. And if you can enable technology that either supplements fully or helps the process for these healthcare companies to work with, their patients, those two things are going to be really interesting areas to watch out for. That I think that, again, it's not the pandemic and COVID has not kind of created these markets. It's only just accelerated them by a good 10 years.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see what happens off the back of this. I think the next 2 years, especially in the environment we're in, it's going to be a catalyst for a lot of those businesses. All right. So lastly, I love this question. This has become my favorite on the show is kind of the brainstorm. So this is how I love to frame it. If let's say Felix Gray was gone tomorrow, RIP Felix Gray, and you couldn't build a new brand in this space, what's another idea that excites you enough today that you would consider, building a business starting tomorrow in? And we can just riff back and forth on some of the, poke of the holes and talk about how you bring it to market.
Yeah, I think there's probably some really interesting things around. I know the e-commerce space, right? So I think that there's probably some interesting things at the platform level there that are pretty cool. So, I definitely think I think there are great brands to start first and foremost. And I think the interesting things with good brands, there either has to be pretty strong retention baked into the inherent business model, or there is a strong CPG component that will serve it well. So like, for instance, we're starting to grow out our omni-channel expansion pretty significant ways. I think that those are places that have moats because like a Target retailer has limited shelf space. So they're not bringing in whereas anyone can advertise on Facebook and have a Shopify site, not all of them can then land on the shelves of Target. And so businesses like that, I do think are still amazing brands to start. So when you think about food, when you think about cleaning products, those are some really interesting places to start. And then I think that there's some really interesting ways of when you kind of look at who is driving a lot of sales and awareness, it often is at the influencer level. And I think there's probably some really interesting ways to build businesses that allow those people to directly take advantage of their influence and grow their businesses in pretty easy and democratized ways, right? So you'll see that happen, right? Like Kylie Jenner building $1 billion makeup business is because of her influence. And you'll see, there's a company in the eyewear space that teamed up with a bunch of celebrities called Pre-Revo. they sold for 100 million to Safalo. So you will see that happen. But, the normal YouTube star that has 100,000 followers might not be able to cash in on that, but they might be able to soon. And I think that those are some interesting businesses to look out for.
Yeah, that last piece is super fascinating because I think if you think about why didn't, let's call them the mid to large tier influencers, like the mega tier, the Jake Pauls, Kylie Jenners, they've already figured it out. They have so much experiment money to burn and resources at their disposal. Why haven't the mid to large tier pursued that? It's because they didn't have either the resources, the know-how, or because the platforms weren't built yet to allow them to do it with ease, or at least experiment lower risk. So
Yep.
that's fascinating. What do you think would be the play there if you were trying to build a business around that? Would it be like a services-based company where you basically were the middle layer between connecting that influencer and some of these, you give them the toolkit and the how-tos and you support them from the supply chain and ops perspective? Or how would you think about it?
Yeah, I think that, it would probably be a little bit of everything. But if you think about the marketing off the bat, your cost per acquisition is going to be really small if you have good influence. So it then becomes a supply chain question. It becomes supply chain, inventory, financing, all those things that are difficult to do. And every single person in a physical product company has to get over that hurdle. And if from earlier, you're talking about different lessons, I definitely when we first started and, when we first kind of started to take off, our operations were a complete mess. And that was negatively affecting our NPSs. Is you would see Facebook or Instagram ads and all of a sudden there'd be comments haven't gotten my thing in 3 weeks. It was negatively affecting the customer experience. It was negatively affecting our brand. And so we put a lot of money into operations. I think that stuff is not only scary to start, but it's scary to maintain. So I think that focusing on that level is important, but then obviously as you're looking to scale, making sure that there are marketing solutions beyond just your influence are ways to continue to grow. And then I think at the platform level, it's making sure that you're then being selective about potentially who you're working with at first. I think there's definitely a lot of potential holes that you can poke in that business, but it is something where, we pay influencers for they love the product, but we still pay them. There's an interesting way of turning it around where why is that influencer not starting the brand themselves?
Yeah. And so, a question on that, how do you think about how much penetration or how much juice the influencer is squeezing out of their audience in terms of conversion to purchase for you every time you work with them? Because what I'm wondering is why aren't brands creating deeper partnerships with influencers that are longer lasting, not just a single ad or a round of ads, but actually, you've seen this a little bit where the big mega brands will do a collaborative partnership where the brand makes a version of their product. But even those seem half-assed kind of when it comes to the marketing and promotion after the initial blast. Why do you think that doesn't happen more? And how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you exhaust audiences pretty quickly.
Yeah.
It's that person has,
that
person has a reach of, 100,000 people, call it 1 million people. Maybe a percent or two of those people are actually going to end up purchasing, and they might get hit over the head with it a little bit to get a little bit of awareness. But at some point, you're going to find that you've exhausted that audience, and you're going to have to wait maybe 4 months, maybe 6 months, maybe a year until that audience is kind of more people are ready to buy again. They've heard about you from other ways, or that influencer has brought in more people into their mix. I think that is really where it comes down to, and you see that at every level, right? Podcasts, where we do a lot of podcast advertising, it's the same type of thing, right? Where we're not going to advertise every single day on a podcast because at some point that audience is completely exhausted.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know you got to get out of here. So one last point I'll make on it is I'm sure, the influencer space is fascinating to me because really what it boils down, it's just advocacy. It's just another form of advocacy. This is how word of mouth has been working for millennia at this point. But what's fascinating is I feel like the strategy for most companies is to kind of target a sector of influencers and, spread the love around. But at the end of the day, aren't those audiences fairly overlapping, right? The people that are following one, maybe following numbers 2, 4, and 6. And so, how do companies think about placing their bets? Wouldn't it make more sense, although maybe unconventional, to spread around different complementary sectors?
Yeah. So I think that this is where at the end of the day, what we really look at more than anything else, like money in, money out, like, because it gets so complicated. Because you're right, it could have that effect. On the flip side, it might have a multiplier effect, because I'm a big believer in, like, there's Instagram brands and then there's like brands, right? So if I just see a brand on Instagram and all I see them on Instagram, it's like, all right, these guys are like really not that big. I'm only seeing them in one place. Now I start to listen to you on a podcast. Okay, I follow this influencer. I heard about you that way. Then I heard about you from this other influencer that I also follow. And now you have this kind of halo where it's like, like, this is legit. They're kind of all over the place. I'm not just seeing it in my like feed as a paid advertisement. And that, I think, is the flip side of it, right? So I think it could go either way. And really, at the end of the day, at the marketing level, it's like dollars in, dollars out. And then you're kind of measuring attribution through clicks, through how did you hear about a surveys. But like at the full end of the day, you really just look at money in, money out.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of room for like the analytics behind social influence to build out. I mean, podcasts have some of the worst analytics ever. Like, people don't even know like how many subscribers they have. So I'm sure there's a long way to go for that.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. I think that it'll be interesting to see, as Spotify continues to invest heavily into podcasts, if they start to create better advertising tools. Because like right now, you get you don't have listens, you have downloads. And it works really, really well for like the podcast groups, because that nebulousness is really nice for the podcast hosts. But the best podcast hosts, if they're getting a ton of engagement, you should want to know that, right? And so I do think that there's really interesting ways to build. I think it would have to be an existing company that is a big, massive podcasting platform already where people consume, because I don't think that they're willing to just integrate a tool on top of that. So it'll be interesting to see, but I think like Spotify and Apple are probably the two best positioned. And Spotify has definitely put a lot of money and thought into growing out podcasts on the consumer side. I have a feeling they're probably going to start doing some pretty interesting things on the advertising side too.